So this one is called Everyone Died and No One Learned Anything. As Jeff pulled himself from his shallow grave again, the first thought to pass through his rotten head was that things had really changed since the butcher died. The other dead children crawled out of the soil from their unmarked graves all around him. All right, so if you need any trigger warnings, let that first paragraph serve. Jeff used one of his fingers that still had skin over it to unclog his ears. At least there were no worms burrowing around in there this evening. He used his bluish tongue to force the grit out from between his remaining teeth as he approached the old house. Let's say the old house where they had all died. Suffered and died. All right. Most of the windows had been broken, but not all of them from him and his friends. Were they really friends? They were his only companions for untold years now. Everyone being killed by the same deranged man gave them a bond, but it wasn't exactly the building blocks of true friendship. He missed his friends from when he was alive. Say he missed his real friends. His real life friends from when he was alive. He missed his mother and the rest of his family too, wherever they were now. Okay, this is a sentence. He missed his family too, and thought often of his mother. All right, that'll work. I made some changes to what I thought I was going to do with the story at the end, so I got to fix a couple things at the beginning to make that line up. The porch steps had broken through. It could have been vandalism, but it looked like old-fashioned rot to him. Jeff had died young, and there was much he didn't know, but he understood rot on a personal level. He took a moment to scratch at his exposed rib bones through the open wound in his belly. "Are you going back in, Jeffrey? You know he ain't in there." Jeff turned about, listening to his brittle joints pop and the bones grind together. Tyler was missing most of his nose, and the rest of his face was drawn and long in a way that reminded him of a horse. Of course, he wasn't too keen on seeing how his own face looked, let's say at this point. A lot of dead people in these stories. Dylan and Stanley looked even worse than Tyler as they helped the young kids get out of the ground too. There wasn't much muscle left on them at this point, and Jeff thought more and more that there was no point to these nightly adventures. There was no real point to these nightly adventures. But this is what they did. They were driven to rise. And when the sun approached the eastern horizon, they'd be forced to return and bury themselves again. Not everything I write on here is horror, but that tends to be what I do the most of. All right, he thought a lot about the butcher even after all this time. He really thought about him more than his poor mother. They had haunted the butcher for all the years he had gone without getting caught. Jeff supposed you couldn't really say that he got away with it. He never went to prison, but let's say the man never went to prison. The man never went to prison, but the undead children had punished him and made him sorry all the rest of his life. Once he was gone, they looked for him for a long time, because they didn't quite feel done with him even in death. But the old man had decided it was probably wiser to haunt other places. Tyler chewed on something and then spit out the pieces of what had to be more than one bug. "Are you ready? What's the plan tonight?" Jeff asked. "Raise hell," Tyler said. The routine was getting old, but at least Tyler came up with new things to say many nights. Raise hell was an old favorite. I'm going to put all these in italics. Raise hell was an old favorite. Take over the world was another classic. Tyler also rotated through get laid, find something to eat. Let's say find something good to eat. Scares some old women. Let me add something here. Scared some old women out of their stockings. See what trouble we can find. Let's say chase the sun. And find a party to crash. He even made Jeff laugh on rare occasions when he came up with something surprising, but there was nothing surprising or funny tonight. They were just going to raise hell, apparently. All right. They just started walking. Jeff and Tyler led the way. The other kids trailed behind. Dylan and Stanley were close enough to the front of the crowd for Jeff to hear them talking about which comic books they used to own. How could they still give a care about something like that? He supposed they had to talk about something, or it was all just shambling silence through the dark streets. Out on the edge of the woods. I feel like I need to add one more thing here. Out on the edge of the woods, a wrecked car remained speared into the trunk of a rotting tree. Jeff often wondered if the car had killed the tree or not. A couple sat on the hood and talked quietly to each other. They looked like they might have been young when they died, but sometimes it was hard to judge age when bodies had decayed that far. He was missing an arm, and she tried to hide the missing side of her face with her brittle hair. It didn't work so well. Jeff tried to figure out whether they knew each other in life. The boy, let's do, don't usually use parentheses very often in stories, but I'm going to do it anyway. The boy or man waved with his one arm. Jeff and a couple of the little kids waved back as they passed. Tyler stuck up a middle finger. Of course he did. He was Tyler. The boy on the car with his ruined girl gave a cold sneer and looked away, but made no move to come after Tyler for the offensive gesture. Why are you like that? Jeff asked. So cool, you mean? I don't know, man. I was just born with it. Alright. There wasn't much left of the town. Many houses and businesses were in slightly better shape than the butcher's old house, but only slightly better. Other corpses shifted and lumbered through the streets. They hunted around and inside the darkened structures that they likely had searched 100 times before. Doing the same thing over and over struck Jeff as crazy. Many of them had dark holes where their eyes should have been, so maybe that was the best they could do. He thought about what it would be like to find some girl and sit on the hood of a car talking to her all night. Couldn't be any more pointless than all this wandering around. Would he want to hang out with some girl missing half her face, though? He was dead too, and coming apart slowly, but all this still grossed him out. All right. Jeff wondered how long he and his undead buddies from the butcher's backyard would still have their eyes. They had been dead a while. Each had been killed at different times over a wide span of years. Jeff knew he and Tyler had watched entirely different cartoons and worshipped different sport and rock and roll heroes. Had they lived, they'd have probably never met or been friends. Were they friends, though? Either way, he thought they should be far more decomposed than they were, especially judging by the ones that dug their way out of proper cemeteries around town. All right. Tyler asked, "You want to swing by the house?" "What house?" "Your house," Tyler said. "Why would I want that? There's no one there." "I know, but maybe old time's sake." "You used to sneak off there on the regular, right? Why don't we go by your house instead?" "My whole neighborhood got knocked down years ago, and they put up 100 houses that all looked the same." "That's a shame, Tyler. Does it make you sad?" "Bite me," Tyler said. Jeff laughed. "Looked like there was something funny tonight after all. We're only supposed to bite the living, right?" Dylan stepped up behind and between them. Jeff could... wrong kind of here. Hold on just a second. It's the homophone typos that I feel the dumbest about. Like if I miss one of those in a story and it gets out. When people read that and see that I used like the wrong kind of here or the wrong kind of there, it makes me feel dumber than a regular typo. Jeff could hear something crackling each time Dylan took a step as the boy asked, "Do you think we're really zombies like the ones in the movies?" "I never saw those movies," Tyler said. Jeff shrugged and felt the dry skin on his back tear just a little. He needed to be careful if he wanted to avoid coming apart at the seams. "I don't know, some of them sure act like it." As if on cue, an old woman in a mud-smeared dress walked out of the boneyard next to the old abandoned church, dragging one broken ankle behind her. She groaned and moaned as she passed diagonally through the street in front of the column of dead boys. "I think some of them had their brains removed," Tyler said. "What?" Stanley asked from further back. How could they still move around with no brains? Tyler glared over his shoulder and Stanley shrank away a bit. Jeff thought it was probably the missing nose that made Tyler so foreboding. He had a sharp tongue and certainly a mean streak, too. Tyler turned forward before he said, "Did you really just say that? Every dead person crawls out of the ground every night now, and you think the parts that they take out at the autopsy would keep them down?" All right. A naked man who had decayed so much above his legs as if to be modest again wavered past them in the next lane going the other way. From the neck up, cracked makeup and a waxy film seemed to preserve the dead man's features and hairdo. Jeff thought that might be from the funeral home. The guy didn't look well above or below the neck really, but being dead would do that to you. Dylan said, "In the zombie movies, you lose the brain and you stop moving." "Not Return of the Dead," Stanley said. "Those zombies could talk like us and nothing killed them. Not even the brain." "Brains," Stanley moaned, holding out his arms in front of him. A few of the younger boys laughed, but the sounds were hollow and dry. Let's say Jeff wasn't sure they got the joke. "They're just movies, not real life, you dummies," Tyler said. They continued to argue the rules of the zombies, both fictional and real, as some disturbance ahead caught Jeff's attention. He wasn't the only one either. Many other corpses in various stages of decay turned and picked up their pace as much as they could to head in that direction. The old woman with the broken ankle hopped and shuffled past them and ahead, her dress ripped a few inches up the side from her effort. This revealed dark spider webs of veins in the pale, wrinkled flesh. Jeff wondered if all that damage was from after she died or not. The naked man, still wearing his waxy makeup, hustled by on the other side. Jeff sidestepped until he almost bumped Tyler, trying to give that creep a clear path. What are you doing, man? You stink too much to be getting that close to me." Jeff almost made a comment about how Tyler probably couldn't smell anything with a big butthole where his nose should be, but Jeff stilled his tongue. It wasn't just that it would be hurtful. Tyler was hard to deal with even when you didn't antagonize him. Someone screamed from out of the mob of bodies gathered around a car wrecked half up onto the curb. That stopped all other conversation. A group of battered and scarred women stood close together on the other side of the road and opted to walk through the lawns between houses away from the scene. They were just as dead as the rest of them, but appeared to want no part of this. All right. Kind of differentiating some different styles of these undead creatures, I guess. Dylan asked, "What dummy would still be out here at night if they were still alive?" Well, they won't be alive for long, Tyler said. Well, that doesn't need to be a question. So let's change that to a comma, shall we? Where do the ones that are killed and not buried go during the day? Stanley asked. They probably just crawl into bed like every other person, Dylan said. Stanley appeared to be considering it. You really think so? I don't know. I'm in the dirt under the backyard next to you every day, aren't I? I gotta run. Have a good stream. Thanks so much, and I appreciate the follow. I'll check out your streams as well. All right. Glass shattered on the driver's side, and the screaming got louder. Vandalism, Jeff muttered. Yeah, someone called the cops, Tyler said, to laughter from the rest of the group. I think one of those guys biting her on the boob is a cop, Dylan said. The boys laughed again. It could be funny, Jeff supposed, but he guessed that most of the kids were just laughing at the word boob. They dragged her from the car and fell upon her in the street. Her screaming went on for a while. They tore at her clothes and then tore at her flesh. Blood ran out from under the bare feet of the dead and pooled in bright, thick puddles on the asphalt. Let me add in the there. Again, I apologize if you're not in for gore. If you need to head on, I understand. Why do they eat them? Why do they eat them, do you think? Dylan asked. I don't feel like eating anyone. I don't know, maybe we're different. Some of them can talk too, though, and they seem sort of normal when they aren't eating anyone. Stanley said. Maybe it's because we were killed, Jeff said. Everyone got quiet. Even the woman being slaughtered went silent, leaving only the sounds of chewing and slurping. All right, I need to turn that into an and. All right. What do you mean? Tyler finally asked. Jeff shrugged and felt the fissure in the skin along his back pull again. He had to remember to stop doing that, or soon he'd have nothing holding his insides together. A blackened body that was mostly skeleton pulled itself along the street toward the pooling blood, as if in warning of what Jeff's future might hold. Other less desecrated bodies knelt in the street and started lapping up the blood. Jeff said, being killed might make us different, the way we were killed maybe. The fact that we were ghosts before all this started, before all this stuff with rising bodies started, might be part of it too. Oh, I feel like I need to sneeze. Tyler waved Jeff's thoughts off. Jeff's random thoughts off. The skin split over one of his fingers and white bone jutted free. Nonsense. They're not really eating her. They just kill her and she becomes one of us. I'm not like them, Stanley said. Aren't we, though? Tyler challenged. All right, let me put a question mark there, as Tyler challenges their notions about themselves. I'm not eating anyone. I'm not losing my mind like a flesh-eating zombie, Dylan said. We may not have eaten anyone, Tyler said, but we sure did have our way with the butcher when he was still alive. Dylan and Stanley both spoke over one another at once. He deserved it. Of course he did, Tyler agreed. I'd do it again if we could find him. Maybe that woman had it coming too, maybe not. It doesn't matter. We're all dead in the end, one way or the other. We didn't used to get up each night and keep walking around, though, Dylan said. Didn't we? I remember getting up all the time since I died, Tyler said. None of the boys had a challenge for that. Then Tyler stepped forward. I'm going to try some. Try some? Stanley asked. You're going to eat her? Dylan shook his head. Tyler kept walking. All right. I'm going to try some of the blood at least, just to see what all the fuss is about. The younger boys cowered away, but they kept watching, and they didn't leave. Are you seeing this? Dylan asked. He turned and then frowned. Where did Jeff go? All right. Say Jeff made his way through the house and then down the basement stairs. It was dark, and even though he spent much of his afterlife under the dirt. It still took his eyes longer to adjust than in life. Still lost in the dark, he said, "Mom?" One of the lanterns flared. Alright, let me spell something right here. Let's change lanterns to lanterns and flared to what it's supposed to be. One of the lanterns flared up, but his mother kept it low so as not to be spotted outside. If the others, like him, came down here after her, Jeff didn't know what he would do. A few other faces shone at the edges of the light. Most of them retreated from the light and from Jeff's presence. Even the ones that knew him in life didn't much care for his presence now. His mother said, "Come here, baby." Jeff ran forward, and she took him into her arms. He knew he was gross. He knew he stunk like the dead body he was. Others were sickened by his smell, and he imagined that odor lingered down here in their stale basement long after he left. But his mother held him. Held his cold body until he decided to let go. Are any of them close? Not very. But the streets are full, as always. Mom, stay hidden. We will. We always do. Is there anything you need me to get you? She patted his scalp very gently and answered, "We move about during the day and get what we need. Are you going to need to move on soon, Mom? Don't stay here just because of me. If there's somewhere safe, somewhere safer, I mean, or with more supplies. Don't worry about that, Jeffrey. We'll take care of ourselves. Someone coughed over in the shadows. Someone coughed over in the shadows, and then it turned into a gag. Into a gagging noise. Jeff couldn't tell if that was one of his cousins. Alright, let me fix that. Jeff couldn't tell if that was one of his cousins who had continued to grow up after Jeff stopped aging. He let out a cold sigh. Mom said, I can go out with you into the yard for a while. It'll be okay. And we can talk. No, stay down here until morning. I'll come back some other time. Probably not tomorrow, though. I don't want anyone getting suspicious. She hugged him again. I'm always glad to see you. I thought I never would again. I'm so sorry we lost you. I love you, Mom. And it's okay. He wasn't sure any of it was okay. He wasn't sure of anything, but he pulled away from her and used the back stairs to exit. Alright, there we go. All right, I think that was a missing scene there. Jeff emerged from the basement of his house. He probably shouldn't have come, but he missed them. Basement scared him ever since the butcher. This was where Jeff was taken, right out of his yard and over the fence. He thought he'd never see his family again. He certainly didn't expect to see them like this. Sometimes he offered to get them things they needed. Let's say because he wanted to do something for them. Something more than just being part of the danger out here. But Mom always told him they could get what they needed during the day. There wasn't much left to find, though. Eventually they would have to move on. But to where? This was apparently going on everywhere, according to the survivors down there. Well, Tyler said, as he led the other boys through a hole in the broken fence into Jeff's overgrown yard. "What you doing, sport?" "What the hell did you do, Tyler? You look like you took a bath in someone's period." I apologize for those of you listening in if that's too gross. Tyler wiped at the blood coating his chin and running down his chest. He looked like a wild beast painted like that. Wild beast. All painted in gore like that. She was bleeding for sure. "Did you enjoy it? Are you a real zombie boy now?" "Don't change the subject. What are you doing here?" Alright, that doesn't need to be a question mark. "Don't change the subject. What are you doing here? What are you hiding?" "You gross me out, Tyler," Jeff told himself. "Gross me out, Tyler." Jeff told himself inside his head over and over again not to look back at the storm door leading to the basement. I didn't want to watch. It made me sad, so I came here to look at our old stuff. Tyler licked his red lips with his black tongue. "Let me play with your old stuff." "Go play with yourself, Tyler. Take a bath. You're a mess." "I know," Tyler said. "My mommy would be so mad if she hadn't forgotten me a long time ago. Maybe I can borrow your mom." "If you can find her," Jeff said, "I'd love to see her again." "Maybe I should look in there." Tyler stepped around Jeff, and he fought the urge to stop him. "Maybe you're hiding her in the basement." "Well, if she was there, I'd ask her what she did with all my stuff. How long did she wait before they threw it all away and gave up on me?" "It's almost like I never lived there at all. How could they do that to me? None of this was my fault. I was just a kid." Tyler hesitated. "Hell, don't go all mushy on me, Jeff. We're rotting away fast enough already. If it makes you feel better, they knocked my whole house down and built one they thought was better." Jeff nodded. "That does make me feel better." "Bite me," Tyler said. "No thanks. You look like you would taste like roadkill." The boys laughed. Jeff thought he should win an award for an acting job so good that it made Tyler sympathize. All right. Good stuff. I bet your mother would taste good, Tyler said, and turned his milky eyes on Jeff's house. If we ever find her, I'll tell you the flavor once I'm done. Jeff balled his fists and started to say, if I ever what? What's your problem? You want to burn the place down, maybe? Would that make you feel better? Dylan cut him off. Oh my God, there he is, look. A few of the younger boys actually dropped to their knees. Many of them whimpered. This was still the monster that had been all their shared nightmare. Standing there at the edge of the fence was the butcher. Of course, he was older. He looked feeble as always, but being dead like the rest of them, he was moving around lively. Holy crap, Stanley said. It's really him. Jeff had still kind of thought that he might be dreaming this when he first saw the man standing there, much like the day he'd been taken. But then the butcher showed his discolored teeth. The gold tooth that Jeff had stolen from the man himself was still missing. He could see the dark socket where it once lived. Why was he here? The details were sharp. The details were sharp in Jeff's undead vision. It had to be fear, but nothing in his body was still working. And that included fear hormones. This fear was coming from within whatever remained of his soul. It had been a long time since Jeff had been afraid, and the last time was with this monster of a man. If you didn't count his fear of Tyler discovering Jeff's mom hiding in the basement. There was no dirt on the butcher. There were little pieces of deteriorated red fabric spotted over the dark suit jacket and pants. The butcher had no loved ones by the time he died, and as far as Jeff knew, there was no funeral. There was some sort of white paint up around the dead man's sunken eyes, but it didn't appear to be funeral home makeup. So where the hell had he been? The butcher growled at them. Actually growled from deep in the dead man's throat before he said, "Did you boys miss me?" A few more kids took a step back. He laughed, and it was a horrid noise. "You can't hurt me anymore, but I owe each of you little buggers a hurtin' for certain." Jeff stepped forward instead of back. "If you think we can't hurt you, then you don't know much about how this works. The butcher's broken smile wavered. Then he said, I know far more about pain and death than you will ever learn. And I'm going to remind you of that, little boy. Tyler, covered in fresh blood, stepped up beside Jeff. Dylan and Stanley lined up on the other side. The butcher's smug grin faltered again. Jeff said, last time I saw you, you begged me to leave you alone. You begged for mercy. I took your tooth. I remember you begging, too. I took far more from you. That's pretty sinister. Alright, I'm probably going to need to add in a scene where we actually see what the kids do to this guy, but I'm going to leave that for the next edit, I think. Not the last time you saw us, though, old man. You are in our world now, Jeff said. Tyler took another step. You made a huge mistake coming back here, but I'm so glad you did. The butcher took a step backward, and that was all they needed. The boys rushed forward. Even the little ones joined the chase. The butcher ran. He cried out. He might have had a chance to get away, but he twisted one of his knees and the leg nearly came off. The boys were determined, and unfortunately for the butcher, there were still hours before dawn. All right.